We are live.
Good afternoon, everyone. Now is the time set for the work study session of the Arizona State Schools for the Deaf and the Blind Board. I begin with item 1, the roll call. Suke, can you take the roll call?
Sure can. Linda Bove. I see her.
I see her on the Zoom.
Okay. I'll move forward and come back around.
Yeah.
Okay. Brittany Buchanan.
Present.
Lynn Davison.
Present.
Mike Gordon is absent. PV Jantz. I see him on screen too. Dean Howard.
Present.
Suke Kneifel. David Nigro.
Present.
Okay. And then Aaron Wonders.
Present.
And I'll go back to PV Jantz.
Sue, this is Leticia. I just
Yes.
got a text from Linda that's saying she can't open her picture, her camera. So
Okay.
I don't know.
But she's present. You got a text
Okay.
from her, so we're good.
Okay.
Okay.
Great, thank you, Suke.
You're so welcome.
Linda, we can work on that. I hope to open that up and let us know when you're able to do that. Moving on to number 2, we have the review of strategic planning to date. And again, we have some new board members. I think this is the first work study session for 3 of the board members, and we do have a new board member that is new for today, and we'll go through a more formal introduction at the next board meeting. This was a recent change. But to review this to date, this is the strategic plan is really the work of the board. That's kind of what the board does. It's a primary responsibility of ours to do long-range strategic planning, to lead the agency over time, and to build institutional stability. The staff is charged with running the agency day to day, implementing the various that we would direct. But our job is really to lead the way and to provide the vision. So this is really the work of the board, and I'm really happy that everyone's participated in this project over time. We've worked on this for several months now. We've got delayed a little bit due to COVID, but if you stretch back, and again for the new board members, you can view all of our work study sessions online. If you look back, you can see that we took a survey and we did some brainstorming in one session. And then we kind of went out and we studied different strategic plans from all different sorts of schools and school districts. So school districts in Arizona, schools for the deaf and schools for the blind in the Western United States, in California and Colorado and in Utah and Texas and some other places, New Mexico. And we got an idea of what the landscape was. I think there were a couple of dozen or so that we actually pulled and reviewed in detail. And we were able to draw from that and kind of come to what really mattered to us and what mattered to ASDB in the unique role that this agency plays in Arizona. We were able to, again, in prior work study sessions, build some pillars. That these are really our core values of the agency. We were able to get some consensus on that, and then we moved on, to some other the priorities, and these are the high-level priorities that advance each pillar. And under each pillar, we developed some guiding principles, and each of those guiding principles support that particular priority. Again, that's I think what we've referred to informally as the top of the page. So that's been our work thus far. And that's kind of where we've been in this process again for the new board members. I'll move on to point 3 where we talk about today's task, but I do want to reminder as a housekeeping matter, if a board member does need to drop off of the call, please just send Letitia an email so that we can properly record the time of your departure for the minutes. We want to make sure we get an accurate record for that. So number 3, explanation of today's tasks. Today we're focused on the objectives. We've already had one work study session that's based on looking at these objectives. This is the bottom of the page, as we informally call it. And we've looked at these at the most recent work study session. We had quite substantial feedback for the staff back in February, early February. They've gone and they've made some substantial improvements, I think, to this plan, which we all now have and we've had for over a week now, so that we can review it in this work study session and provide some input on each one of these sets of objectives. And to kind of, again, to orient yourself, these are specific, often quantifiable metrics by which we're going to judge the agency's performance in the future. So, today is not a discussion of tactical choices. We're not going to discuss a particular action or not taking a particular action. We're going to be talking about setting the groundwork or setting the metrics by which we'll know we have achieved, or we know we've achieved progress when X happens, when we see some metrics move in some direction, and when we develop these metrics and start looking at them, because frankly, for many of these we don't have baseline data, so we want to develop that. That progress isn't going to be shown for a number of years, and for some of them, because we just don't have baseline data for some of these metrics. But the idea is not that we're going to take a particular tactic or not, or take a particular action or not. We want to talk about what the strategic objective should be, and then the rest of our work in the coming months and years is going to be working on those tactics to achieve those strategic goals and strategic objectives. For each of the objectives, again, we're going to look at the objective, what it is, what we're trying to measure, what we're trying to look at, the methodology by which we're going to measure it so we can be consistent over time, and the potential limitations of that methodology, because we know there's limitations on any piece of data that we're going to gather, the frequency by which we're going to measure it. This way we're applying these measurements consistently over time. And we understand the limitations of each one. I don't think there's going to be a particular metric we're going to look at and say, we're going to judge the entire agency's performance on this one metric. It's really, how are all these metrics performing as a set, on a holistic basis. And we're going to monitor these continuously. So we're going to match our agendas in the future for our meetings up with these pillars and priorities. We're going to be able to very specifically track our actions in the future that will support different areas of the strategic plan. And we're going to be able to monitor this data continuously. Some of the data is only going to get updated every year, some of it twice a year, some of it every month or every couple of months. They're going to be at different frequencies, but we're going to be able to see this and monitor it in a regular basis. Likely every board meeting, maybe more frequently than that, but at least every board meeting we'll have an idea of where we're going, and if we're not making progress that we want, we can all talk about it and talk about what we can do differently, to start moving the ball forward there. So again, that's why this today's pretty important, again, we want to hear all the board's input on these particular objectives. Now before we move on to the next point in 4, again, just to remind the new board members, this is a more informal meeting than we typically have. A regular board meeting. Our agenda isn't as structured. We still have an agenda. We still have to stick to it. We can only discuss things that are reasonably related to the agenda items and what's already been put up on board docs. So we can't stray too far from that. But in terms of the discussion, it's a pretty open discussion. Feel free to jump in when you can, or when it's appropriate. That said, please be respectful of other people's time. We have no time limit for this meeting, and so there's plenty of time for everyone to be heard. I'm not going to be the moderator in terms of calling on people necessarily. I will kind of sit back and try to make sure that everyone has time, and that someone's trying to get a point in that they can be recognized. But for the most part, I think if you just observe typical rules of civility, I think we'll be okay. But again, there's no reason to raise your hand or something like that to be called on. You can talk when it's appropriate and when someone else is finished. And again, we do want to hear from
David,
everyone.
this is Linda. If
Yes.
you don't mind, can we start with introductions as far as who's replacing Mike Manley?
Oh yes, Linda, and maybe I'm not sure if the connection didn't work, but in the roll call, Aaron Wonders has replaced Mike Manley as the representative from Superintendent Hoffman, and that was just a recent change. We'll have a more formal introduction, and we'll recognize Mike Manley more formally at our next regular board meeting. But Aaron Wonders, for the purposes of of the board really, but for this meeting in particular, is now on our board as of I'm not exactly sure the date. It might have been yesterday, and he'll be in Mike Manley's seat. We'll also have to replace Mike Manley on the finance committee, but again, we'll take all of that regular business up at the next board meeting in May. Does that make sense, Linda?
Could we maybe talk a little bit about him? I feel more comfortable since he's here in our meeting. I'm not sure or familiar with Aaron Wonders. What's your background and how are you coming to the board with us? Because that's typically a cultural thing we do in deaf cultures. We want to know who we'll be working with. So I definitely would like to get to know Aaron a little bit more as a board member.
Sure. I guess as we're here, to be honest, I don't know Mr. Wonders either. So, Mr. Wonders, if you would like to just maybe come on and say a few words about yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. Aaron Wonders here on behalf of the Department of Education. I'm the Deputy Associate Superintendent for Legislative Affairs at the Department of Education. My background is really in the legislative affairs. So prior to working at the department, I was a staffer over in the House of Representatives in the State House. I staffed the House Education Committee for 6 sessions, somewhere around there, and then have joined the Department of Education since the beginning of 2019. So in my capacity as a board member here, serving on behalf of Superintendent Hoffman, and very much looking forward to getting to know everyone and working with the board.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wonders. And again, I think we'll have a more formal introduction. And now that we understand that you replaced Mr. Manley, we'll be able to do that, I guess, as we typically do at the next board meeting. So now that we've gone through that, we've kind of set the stage.
And just, I'm sorry to interrupt, but from a deaf perspective, I think that's important culturally speaking, since it's a representative of our board, just to give you an idea of who it is that's here now on our board. And I think others can hear his voice, and in deaf speak, we see your voice now. So thank you.
Thank you, Linda. So with that said, the next item, which is going to be the core of our meeting, the pillar presentation and discussion. There are 4 pillars. We're going to take them up in order. Pillar 1 is Superintendent Reichman. Fortunately, she is able to join us. We weren't sure if she would, but she is here. So we're happy about that, certainly. Superintendent Reichman, if you could take us in on just maybe a couple of minutes to talk about your section of objectives, and then we'll open it up to discussion to the board members to discuss those objectives. I know we've had these for over a week now, so I'm hoping that we all have some good input for you.
Thank you, President Nigro.
I'm happy to be here. So members of the ASDB board, my part is the first pillar. I'm focusing on communication and relationship building. That pillar has 3 priorities. If you read our report for our performance measures, you would see that there are 7 metrics under pillar 1. The first priority is first-rate customer service. That has 2 performance measures. One is a survey to parents asking their satisfaction with the school and the programming and ASDB. The second is a satisfaction survey to ASDB employees. Their satisfaction with their jobs and with the superintendent and my work. So those 2 performance measures, when we're thinking about communication and relationship building, how do you measure performance? As you know, ASDB is successful at communicating with the stakeholders. And how do we know we are being successful at building those relationships? So we will be doing these performance measures to try and elicit data for you to be able to review and to see if ASDB is successful at building this capacity for communication and relationships. The second priority is building capacity with school districts. That has 2 performance measures. The first is Special Education's Director's Satisfaction Survey, asking about their satisfaction with ASDB school programs. The second measure is enrollment of students. If special education students are satisfied with our school and our programming, they will refer students to us. So that would be the second measure for that priority in that pillar. The third priority for pillar 1 is engaging the community. That'll be a new survey conducted annually, asking the community about their satisfaction with ASDB. 2 other performance measures will be looking at our webpage. How many people actually look at our webpage? And the second measure will be targeting our social media platforms, such as Facebook, Twitter, and how many people are actually engaging in those posts monthly. So we will be uploading those numbers. That would give us some guidance on how much we are engaging the community. So that is the first pillar. Back to you, President Nigro.
Thank you, Superintendent Reichman. Appreciate that introduction. I think from here we can start. I don't know that I necessarily need to go through objective 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3 individually, but I'd like to open the floor to board members who have any input on any of these objectives.
And this is PV. I think so far it looks wonderful. I do have 2 questions. First being, how do you plan to measure engagement of students and family members, such as parents and the community themselves, that do not have access to the internet, so they will not be able to participate like in social media engagement? And that's typically a challenge for those that do not have that access, especially in those remote rural areas. Second, just based on the involvement, the current numbers appear to predict a specific goal. So, do we have a current target number compared to predictions? Have you compared that? Will that be part of your measurements? To answer your question, we have been performing parent surveys for the last several years. We have collected that data, but we didn't have the board involved with our parent satisfaction and reviewing that. So we already have a system in place for that networking with parents to elicit their feedback on their satisfaction with our schools and our programs. I'm not sure about those who do not have access to the internet. I'm not sure how we handled that in the past. I know that due to COVID, we've had to work with parents to figure out how to get internet access to those students so that they are able to receive their education online. So we have been addressing some of that. Thank you. Hello, Superintendent. This is Linda. That's a good question that was brought up. I really appreciate the layout. You'll have to publish this and get it printed. It'll be called the Bible. I'm curious more about the community. How are you going to be able to collaborate and engage the community? I feel like there has been a gap there. Again, how will you draw them to be engaged? How will you have that measurement? Do you have kind of a vision for that? Or is that, am I jumping ahead too early? This is actually a new area. We have done special education director surveys, parent satisfaction surveys, but we have not done a community satisfaction survey. So we're not sure exactly the details of how it's going to be implemented and what it looks like. But it's like a typical written survey that's sent out. We might not get a lot of response for those. So how are we going to elicit and perform those surveys? We haven't determined that as of yet. We're just proposing this to you that we can do satisfaction surveys to the community. And if the board is interested in that and thinks it's a good idea, we would figure out how to make sure that the blind community as well as the deaf community take that survey and get our responses back. And we want to make sure that the survey itself is accessible and convenient to answer. Thank you. It seems that there's no other questions.
Are there?
So I'll turn it back over to you, President Nigro.
Okay, I have a few questions, and again, if any of the board members have anything else to say, they can jump in after me. Thank you, Superintendent Reitman, for these objectives. I think they're great. They're this whole document I think is just a really substantial improvement from what we looked at last time, and I'm really happy with it overall. In terms of your section, there's just a couple of things I had here. I mean, one, in terms of you talk about in section 1.22 some methodologies or the description of obtaining this data from children that we serve in the early learning preschool, the campus-based schools, and on the itinerant services through the co-ops. In terms of the early learning program, I know that we have some private organizations that serve some of the children in the preschool and early intervention. Will we be tracking the performance of those agencies as well? I mean, in particular, FBC and Desert Voices, and I think Zimmerman is the other contractor. Are we going to be able to break it down by that in that level of detail?
We can do that.
Okay.
I'm not sure that we've done that with parent surveys, but as we gather surveys in the future, we can break that information down by where the student or the child is located and where the parents are receiving services.
Okay, I think that would be helpful for us to have that information. In terms of the number of students served, I know we have the number of students on campus and in the co-op. You bring up some good points in your limitations that the co-op serves students that may age out of or move from that district, right? They're a child isn't necessarily in the same school district their whole career, academic career. They may move. Some of the districts have their own internal resources, and they use the co-ops as kind of a safety net. So they'll use the co-ops to serve some students, but not others. And other students may age out or graduate, and then their numbers will be lower. So I was wondering if we could have some more specificity on trying to obtain some of that data, because I think it'll be helpful for us to understand, why is there more or less engagement with one particular school district, and is it because of performance, or is it because of just other reasons, in terms of the children that we're serving in those areas.
I'm not sure how to respond to that. We obviously have a student count of enrollment, how many students within each school district, but how to figure out why some parents respond to the survey versus why other parents do not. I'm not sure how we would get that information.
And I guess I should clarify, the reason I brought this up is not that we'd be hearing from those parents in a survey, because the one weak point that we have of surveys is, the participation rate, right? So we're not going to get 100%. We'd be ecstatic, I think, to get 75%. And again, there's some limitations there, which we reflect in the document, that sometimes we'll get people who are really satisfied or really not satisfied. Unfortunately, but again, that's a limitation. So to hedge that, to offset that risk or that limitation in a survey, I'd like to see some other objective data that we can obtain to get a better idea of what we're seeing. So it's not necessarily, I guess what I'm saying is, if we move beyond the survey data and track the number of students that we're serving in the co-ops per district, we can see that change a little bit better. I think we already tracked that. I think it's just a question of aggregating it here. But we can see that change. And when I say serving in the district, it's students that we're serving on a year-to-year basis. We can see that trend going in and out. More than a school district dropping out of the co-op, I think that happens less often. I think what happens more often is, as their population that has needs grows and contracts, that's when we see the student counts go up and down.
We could track a ratio of parent responses to the survey by school district. We could do that annually. That's a lot of school districts. We're talking about at least 1,000 different school districts. So to break it down specifically to the number of students in each school district that we serve, and then we can send out the survey as we collect the responses from the parents. We could calculate a ratio, a percentage of each school district. We could do that. That's going to be a significant amount of data.
Yeah, in terms of 1,000 school districts, I mean, I mean, you're right that the drilling down to that number is, and I guess that number sounds high to me, but in drilling it down to that level might be difficult. But without separating from the survey, we know all of the students that we serve in the co-ops, and we know what district they're from. If we can track that over time. Now you're right. If we have many hundreds, let's say, of school districts, that's probably too much to put in our in our metric. But maybe there's some, maybe we could track the ratio of change from year to year and pull out ones that are greater than a certain target amount. I mean, could we do that? So in other words, if a school district has to serve 10 children in 1 year and 3 in the next, that'll at least allow us to take a closer look at that situation.
We could look at the ratio change annually.
Okay.
We could break it down to the regions. We have that 3 regions. And we can see what kind of information that provides us.
Thank you. I think that would be helpful because this way we're getting some data that's not a survey. We're getting data from other sources, so we don't have the limitations of the survey, and we're able to. And I don't know what that kind of threshold will be, if it's 30% or something like that. But if we see a large swing, we might want to note that. And I think we might want to look deeper into why that is. And again, it could just be natural, children getting older, but it might not be, and we want to take a closer look at that.
Kristen, I think you were next.
Oh, we have about 207 districts, and students go to different schools. I feel like we're tracking a different kind of data, but what we could do is we know what districts they are in. We know what schools they are in. Sometimes they jump districts and move within, especially in like the metro areas, as families move. We can kind of keep track of that if that helps you. I'm just trying to figure out what data we already collect that I know we can pull from like right now, if that would help.
Yeah, no, I think that would. I think that would help.
And just a side note on this, when we are looking at parents filling out surveys, there are probably many parents that don't really realize that these services are coming through ASDB. They go to an IEP meeting, there's their hearing impaired teacher or their VI teacher. To them, they belong to the school. They can't make that separation. So, we'll get information, but it's not going to be directly related to ASDB. It's just, we're getting services from this teacher who sees my kid, twice a week. Anyway, just a thought.
This is Linda. President Niger, I think it would probably be best if maybe we can moderate the meeting a little bit, because I'm not sure if we're getting recognized as far as who pops in first. And so for housekeeping purposes, the sake of everyone, if we could raise our hands, that way we know who entered first. The reason I wanted to come in is because I would like to hear more from Lynn Davidson, who does represent school districts. And so what type of metrics we can use. Lynn, if you can review what you just stated, I'm sorry, can you repeat your concerns and how school districts work in tandem with ASDB as far as metrics? How do we measure whether they're an ASDB student, a school district that we offer services to, and how will parents view that? And again, it's service providers. How do we clarify that for parents as far as metrics go?
It's pretty clear at the brick and mortar campuses that the students are attending an ASDB school, and the district should be represented at those IEP meetings because those are their students. Where it becomes more muddy is in the co-ops and the co-ops serving the schools. The parents, I've sat in on many of those meetings, and the parents are happy to have the services, but they don't understand that these services are coming from outside of their school district, that ASDB is providing these services. Because to them, it really doesn't matter. They just want to make sure that their child is being taken care of, getting the services they need, so they don't make that connection to ASDB. Some do, and if we make it clear, but in the long run, the most important thing is that the student is getting the services they need, their goals are being met, things are being provided. What else can I make muddy for you, Linda?
No, thank you, Lynn. Thank you. I appreciate that. PV, yeah. Just to put a thought out there, a word of caution. I want to make sure that we're careful with not skewing the data or dividing the data too much. Otherwise, it would be incremental. The increments would statistically not prove where we're going. And so if you see patterns, I think yes. At the same time, like you said, President Nigro, we don't want to make the numbers too big, but too small so that you can't recognize the patterns. Where do we find that fine balance? I think most importantly, for finding what mistakes or what errors we encounter. So in comparison, what would probably help if we were to compare, let's say, student enrollment decreasing or increasing in a specific school district, and the ratio in a school district. For example, if we're looking at a public school district where the enrollment has gone up or has gone down because maybe there have been some relocation and families have moved, either in or out, we might see a pattern that parallels with our deaf and hard of hearing and visually impaired students within that area as well. So maybe two things to correlate there, the school district in general and the deaf and blind population. So just more of a geographical location, a geographical measurement in comparison to data that we get from surveys. For example, the Department of Education, those numbers based off of relocation, we can compare that and we can draw from that. And listening to what Lynn mentioned, you make a good point. I think that probably is something that we do need to address with first-rate customer service and then building capacity in those two pillars. I think that's how we can effectively approach that. How do we better identify and brand ourselves to parents that they are receiving services from ASDB? How are we clearly stating that ASDB is included, that parents are receiving those services from our providers? And that way they can better answer those surveys.
All right. thank you, PV, for those comments. I think Superintendent Reichman can take all of those comments into consideration for future revisions. If there are no other comments on Pillar 1, we can move to Pillar 2, and that is going to be Dr. Rex. Dr. Rex, if you can give us just a very brief kind of 2-minute overview of these, and then we can get into the discussion.
Pillar 2 has and continues to go under edits and revisions as we look to provide outstanding student development. This pillar focuses on our effort for student growth and development from our early learning program, which is Birth to 5, our campus programs, as well as our statewide itinerant services. And the objectives in this document include us participating in national programs and gathering data, using state assessments to gather data, monitoring our own benchmark assessments, which we have done and continue to do to gather data, our post-schools outcomes data, our student enrollment and completion of their career and technological coursework data, as well as our students that do work experience in our high schools. We have that type of data. And in preparing these tables for this plan, we discovered we have a lot of data and we gather a lot of data. But the information that is included in this pillar to report back to this board annually or maybe quarterly, depending on how it fits, is really to help the board as well as our stakeholders know what we are doing and how we are serving our students statewide. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rex. I can open the floor now to any comments for Dr. Rex on these objectives.
I will open the can of worms. I know that the LEA bill is out there, and where we're at with that, we'll see. But I did notice in 2.2, I guess, talking about the PSO, the post-school outcomes, and that information currently goes to the school districts. If and when and however this all works out, and I don't know that anyone is clear at the moment, and we do become an LEA, will that information go directly to ASDB rather than to the districts?
Fantastic question, to which I answer I do not know, but
and I know it's so.
But just so you know, we are preparing, Jay Johnson is doing advisory council meetings throughout the state. I think we have 4 or 5. We completed our first one this week, and we shared that our board is currently going through a strategic plan, and we are eliciting information from our special education directors because they are truly our partners and they're very important. And post-school outcomes is one thing, so is our statewide assessment, the ELA data, the math data. This is truly a partnership. If we have to give and take, it's going to have to be conversations. It's going to have to come sitting around the table, because we can't improve if we don't have this data to share with you and to help us grow and learn. So to your answer, I do not know, but also to your answer, we are preparing to push in, lean in, or try to gather the information with our partner districts because it is important to us.
Yeah, Lynn, this is David. I mean, you raise a great point. It's going to be hard to monitor these if we don't have the data. But I think that if, for some reason, we end up without access to this data for some reason for a period of time, we can try to go get it. I would think that some of our IGAs that we have with districts would allow for some of this data sharing to occur, without there being, in compliance with education privacy laws, so that we can obtain it and better manage our agency with it. I suppose there's a risk that we won't get it all, or we won't get it as easily, but that's that's certainly a risk. So I understand that, but we'll, I think from my perspective, in terms of from a planning perspective, we should proceed as if we're going to have access to it one way or the other.
I agree. These are wildly audacious goals, but this is what's going to help move us in a better direction. So if we don't aim for the fence, using a baseball term, then we're not going to grow and improve. So we need to have some wildly audacious goals, and let's go for it.
PV, did you have some comments?
I'm curious, what areas will be significantly impacted with LEA or non-LEA?
It's about the partnership. If there are students, PV, then we fill out the post-school outcome information and we get that information directly from the Department of Ed. If we're not the LEA, then sometimes there can be student record information that some districts may not be comfortable sharing. Even though we share kids, we push into them in the itinerant world. Right now, our kids are in our schools, but they are also registered in their home districts. So we will have the opportunity to work through all of these issues.
Maybe I could add an idea to this, or add to that can of worms. Sorry if I do. So with the data, some of the things that might be clearly impacted, LEA versus non-LEA, maybe we need to consider establishing a strategic plan, maybe developing for both cases, if we are determined to be an LEA, or if we are determined not to be an LEA, and what recourse we have. It would be similar, that development, but it would only be impacted by the LEA, non-LEA label. So I don't want us to become kind of stagnant with our process and our data collecting if we are unable to proceed with whatever labeling that we acquire. So I would like us to continue on that trajectory. And I don't want to have to go back and reimagine and redevelop once it is determined.
And I think a lot of this data we can access. We are currently looking at other ways. Public records is a way to access the information. It doesn't drill down specifically always to our kids, but it could get us close. So we are looking at, as you called them, I think, different pathways. We're looking at alternative pathways to try to get the information. So thank you. Great idea.
Dr. X, this is David. I think from on that point, I think that the data that we're going to be looking at is going to be, to me, it's going to be the same, no matter what the LEA issue, how that resolves itself. We have to keep in mind that the LEA issue really affects the students in the brick and mortar schools, which are hundreds of our students. It's a large population, and we serve all their educational needs. But we serve a couple thousand in the co-ops. So we do serve more children in the co-ops than we do in the brick and mortar schools. We do not act as an LEA in those relationships. We act as educational service providers, and we're able to access the data there, right? I mean, we have access to data, certain data from the students that we serve in the co-op. So to me, I don't think it's going to be as big. I mean, it'll be more work certainly, but I don't think it's going to be as large of an obstacle if for some reason we move forward as not an LEA for the students in the brick and mortar schools. From again, referring only to the perspective of data collection, I think that we can get to it and just as we do for the itinerant students, although it would probably be easier for us to get to if we were an LEA or are an LEA, again, being agnostic to whether or not how that issue resolves itself.
And then in terms of the co-ops, are we requiring or mandating information when that collaboration with the current school districts that we are with?
We do share information and they work very well with us. It is I don't, like David said, I don't think it's going to be a problem, but we will find ways of gathering that information so we can update you.
Dr. Rex, in 2.12, and I think some of these numbers may have repeated themselves. I'm not really sure, but I want to make sure before we kind of publish this in finalized form that we have each metric with a different number so we can map it back uniquely. But in 2.12 VI, we referenced the National Outcomes and Developmental Data Assistance Center chart, and that's great. That's a great resource, and that's excellent. There's not an equivalent one for the blind and VI side, and I think we're proposing to use the Oregon project, which is useful for certain things, but I'm not sure it exactly maps up. Is there a way? I mean, do you think there's a way that we could develop our own, set of similar data, or make what's similar to the National Outcomes and Developmental Data for blind and VI, or I know that's a large task, but we have a long time to do it. So what are your thoughts there?
Dr. Ben is already on that. Kendra has been working with the comparison. The 2.11 is an HI based work that is being sponsored at the national level, and then
Dr. Rex, I think you're on mute now, or you were.
Can you hear me
there
now?
You go. Yeah,
Sorry.
now I can hear you.
Dr. Kendra Benedict is working on that, and you saw that first outcome measure 2.1 talks about the HI, and then as you go down, she did a 2.1.2, which is a VI based work. She is looking to develop an equivalent to the HI version. It does not exist currently. Therefore, she wanted to use the modeling on a smaller scale and do it as an in-house project to monitor students. So Kendra is preparing for and developing that right now and working on it.
That's excellent, Kendra. Thank you. Are there other comments for Dr. Rex on 2.1 or 2.2? Or anything in that second pillar? PV?
I noticed with 2.1, there seems to be some struggle with establishing a similar, consistent data collection. And that's for specifically BVI. I know that the Oregon project mentioned using that analysis, which I think is great as a start, but it seems that there are potential concerns about gaps. Is there any research related to maybe Lighthouse or the Helen Keller Center or other blind associations or based programs and what they're using, what kind of assessment tools that they take advantage of for language acquisition?
I'm going to turn that over to Kendra because she's already kind of begun the work, and I think she will do it justice.
So yes, so in answer to that question, like Dr. Rex had already mentioned, there isn't an equivalent project to what's happening with deaf, hard of hearing now in blind VI. With that said, I've done some preliminary research. For those of you who are newer, you might not know that we work very closely with FBC, Foundation for Blind Children. They are one of our contractors. They provide services to students birth to 3 and preschool age in Maricopa County. So I've been working on that with them as well, because we will be responsible ultimately for overseeing their data as well. And since they are one of our contractors, they have confirmed that there is nothing of the equivalent. And even the Oregon project, it's not norm referenced, it's criterion referenced. And so there's just not a lot out there. So, and there's just such a wide variance of levels of ability in blind VI. There are in deaf, hard of hearing, but not as much as blind VI. And you're measuring so much more than just language too, with those kiddos. And so I will continue to work with FBC in coming up with whatever metrics might come available over the course of the next few years. But to my knowledge, with the research I've done thus far, that's what we've been able to come up with. Does that answer your question, PV?
Yeah, that helps. Honestly, I have to admit that I'm a little bit surprised. As an adult and working with this population, you would think that there would be a lot of tools and resources for assessments. And it's typically not language specific. It's more related to accessibility, accommodations, and the like. But language itself, we just assume by that age, they should already have access to language and be progressing. What are some of the data or some of the statistics currently with students that are blind in VI, where their language acquisition is, or the percentage of those who are delayed in language?
I'm not going to try and fake that. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. and again, to have any numbers that you can then apply to the rest of the population, any numbers that are available, you've got to look then at the population you're wanting to apply those numbers to. And if what the population was normed on and the population you're looking at isn't the same, doesn't have the same characteristics, the numbers are going to not be of any use to us. So again, to my knowledge, there is not any norm referenced assessments in blind VI that would allow us to track over time. There's plenty of criterion reference. So are blind VI children making progress in comparison to their hearing peers, what we would expect physically, social, emotionally, fine motor, language, cognitively? Are they reaching those skills? So we're monitoring it, but it's not based on in a comparison necessarily to their peers, to where there would be a percentage that they're doing X percent above the typical peer. There aren't those assessments that are available. We use the Oregon project. We use the communication matrix is another one that we use. And yeah, and certainly if you are familiar with anything else that I'm not, send it my way. I'm not opposed. I love information. So I saw Brittany had her camera open. Did you have a question related to this as well?
Hi, yes. I just, it's kind of just one of those really small things, but I see that all of these are targeted specifically for either blind or deaf. Where does deaf blindness have their outcomes? Where are they factored into, since it's a dual sensory loss instead of either or?
I love that you asked that question. Love that you asked that question. And I think you're right. We did not make a third category for that. And I think we should. It would be very similar to the tests that we're using with blind VI. It depends. As you well know, there can be such a range in there too. We could have kiddos whose needs are predominantly deaf and hard of hearing and could maybe very easily fit into that group. And then there is a group who are more similar to blind VI, and they could be in that group. So maybe putting those together, the blind VI on their own. But again, within that, it's going to vary so much, but I appreciate that input. And I think we can definitely work that into the plan so that we're looking at that as well. So thank you for that.
No problem. I appreciate you taking my question. I mean, I know that you kind of said like we could incorporate it into both categories depending on their strength of their dual sensory loss, but in all due respect, it is deaf blindness, and that is their absolute diagnosis. And maybe that's how they want to identify, and they don't want to be put in categories that are making one seem more or less like over the others.
Yeah,
and I know as a family of that, I wouldn't want my child's disability being one's more or less when as a person she was deafblind. And I know we're a small percent, but I mean, I guess I would, yeah, it's important, but I think personally too, I would just be interested in the exit outcomes and everything for just that small population of people that we service here at ASDB.
Go ahead, Linda.
Yes, this is Linda. I definitely want to vouch with what you just mentioned, Brittany. Absolutely. We have to be able to recognize deaf-blind as a population within its own right and develop that collaboration and the identity within that community. It's pivotal versus selecting one or the other. I think, for example, for myself, if we look at someone who has multiple backgrounds, they are Black deaf. If you were to ask them which they identify with, we're forcing them to make a choice. So we have to respect the intersection within the population we serve. The community, the minority community are so diverse, and they come with different identities and different backgrounds. And so to label one versus the other, we have to recognize all of that and who we are as individuals. So I agree with you, Brittany. I think we need to broaden our labels. And I mean, if you look at this Tucson campus, we have deafblind students there. And how are we tracking their development? Are they in classes with the blind or with the deaf? And so I think it's important to recognize our programs and their post outcomes. Where will they belong in the end? So it's not just the deaf community, not in the blind community, but they actually have their own deaf-blind community, absolutely. And so I hope we take the time to watch even a 20-minute short film. It's called Action Life, or it's a film that has been nominated for an Oscar. And it talks specifically to the deaf-blind. It's called Life. It's a live action film. It's called Feeling
Through.
Excuse me, Feeling Through. Yes, Feeling Through. It's on YouTube. You can watch it. It's a 20-minute short film. It talks about the life of a deaf-blind individual. So I highly encourage everyone to watch that if you haven't had the chance, just to give you an idea of what life will look like in the outside world. So that's what I would like to speak to. Thank you.
Dr. Benedict?
Thank you. I just wanted to add to Brittany and Linda, I just thought of one piece of data that we could include in this is we're currently working with some researchers out of primarily Gallaudet, but a couple of different universities. They are doing a study on protactile sign language. They've been working with about 6 or 7 of our families since December, collecting data on protactile sign language. And we could probably incorporate some of that data into this. That might be a way to start to capture some of that.
That's wonderful. Absolutely. That's amazing. It's revolutionary. And I think it's a change in the right direction for the deafblind community. Protactile uses the entire body, and there's work that's done on the back, on their legs and their arms. And it's a different way of giving them access to communication. And if we start the younger, the better, right? The earlier, the better. So thank you, Kendra.
Kendra, this is David. The other question I had was about, in terms of language acquisition, we've talked, at length over the years about, early identification, right? I mean, that's a key issue. We need to get identified children early so that they can acquire language early and they don't lose as much time. We don't want to see a child at 3 or 4 and having lost all that very important time in childhood. And if Dr. Sims was here, he would often say, from a medical perspective, there are many diagnoses where hearing loss may manifest itself at 2 or at 3. So a child may have hearing as an infant and then lose that hearing later, in that 2 or 3 age. I'm wondering if we can add a metric about, the age or average age of identification, just so that we can keep track of it. Now, that's not always a function of how well ASDB is doing. I mean, those referrals come in from a variety of sources. But I'd like to know, how early or how late are we getting to these children and getting them the services, and at least want to have that idea so that we can see, that may affect some of our outcomes. But we also may be able to work more with the partners that refer these children to us, so that we can try to do something to get to those children, identify those children sooner, and help them acquire language sooner.
I love that idea. We can easily add that to our database. We're right now tracking bilateral versus unilateral. We can easily add the age of identification. We're seeing that as a huge issue right now with COVID. We're getting a lot of very late IDs. And so that could also help us justify the provision of services beyond 3. I know Dr. Sims, that was something that he was very passionate about, providing those parent supports past 3. We have done that during COVID because we just felt ethically and morally that's what we needed to do. And our referral numbers had gone down a bit. So we had the time, and we've continued to support families past 3 who were late identification. The other piece that we're looking at too, that we haven't included in the metrics right now, but we could, AZIP, the Arizona Early Intervention Program, is wanting to make sure as we begin going back into homes, starting tomorrow, we are allowed on a very limited basis to go back into homes. And as we do that, there's a phased in approach. They're wanting us to track race and ethnicity to make sure that there's equity across the state. So we're going to also be monitoring the delivery of services, the frequency of services, the method of services, in looking at race and ethnicity. So if that's something you are interested in, we could add that to our metrics as well.
Thank you, Dr. Benedict. Yeah, certainly the age, is probably the most important thing. We really need to get to these children as early as we can, so that we can help them develop language effectively, because that's really going to help them on a lifelong basis. That's going to have a long effect. And you're right. I know that's one of the reasons why we have the early, we were reorganized to be 3, and I think that's that's the reason we did it, and I think we're seeing benefits from that. PV, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, President Nigro. I also wanted to add that what you touched on, where I was going with Kendra, I wanted to add to that as well. Could we watch our internal data within ASDB as regards to BVI services? For example, how many students are within the IEPs that have targeted goals for language? Can we compare that to our deaf and hard of hearing students that have language goals on the IEPs? Could we compare that to give us a better understanding and sense of what ASDB is missing, and not just age, but what types of goals are language focused for those students? So I'm just curious if there's anyone actually looking at those numbers to see what blind and visually impaired students need in terms of language or emotional social behavior development and their growth. Because I understand there's some outside assessments are limited. Can we use our internal data to assist in figuring out those gaps?
So we can, first, one thing just for clarification is that currently we don't have an in-house preschool program for blind. There used to be one years ago in Tucson, but it closed. We are looking at starting one up again. But as of this time, there is not. We have a few deaf-blind students that attend the preschool here and in Phoenix. But the preschool services that we contract with FBC for those. So we would have to look at their data, at their IEPs, which we certainly can. So I could get current data based on that. Next year, we're going to be servicing preschool students in the public schools. So Jay Johnson's program can focus more on K-12, and we'll be taking on that early learning piece from the cooperatives. So that will be both deaf, hard of hearing, blind, visually impaired, and deafblind. So we can start to gather that data that you're talking about when we start to do that next year. I think it's a great idea.
Awesome.
Great. If there are no other questions on this one, we can move on. I give one more opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Rex. Much appreciated. And Dr. Benedict too, for your input. So next we have Pillar 3. And I believe we have Ms. Pyatt. If you could give us just maybe a 2-minute introduction to Pillar 3.
Good afternoon, Board President and IGRO Board President members. I am going to discuss Pillar 3 today, the superb organizational culture. There are 3 objectives. The first one is to ensure a superb organizational culture through advancing a continuous climate of continuous improvement and modeling service leadership and staff diversity. The second objective is to model servitude leadership by creating more leadership opportunities and increased agency communication. And then the third objective is diversity in staff, serving our students by increasing the percentage of staff who match the ethnicity, cultural, and abilities of the student population. Within those objectives, we have created 5 outcome measures. One for objective 1 is the types of professional development that are being provided. For objective 2, we have 2 objective measures, the communications to the agency and the professional development that we are offering to our leadership. And then on the third objective, we had added 2 outcome measures, one or both of them being for staff and student demographics. I will now turn it over to you for any feedback or questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Are there board members that would like to comment on Pillar 3?
This is PV. Maybe a little bit of a silly question, please forgive me. But I'm thinking back to what Lynn mentioned for the survey. Early intervention, do parents actually know that ASDB are the ones providing that service as well?
Dr. Benedict, I think, can answer that question. It's my impression that they would be, even though we work with other state agencies in to deliver early intervention. ASDB has that responsibility throughout the state, and it's not, in connection with school districts until the age of 3, when there's a transition to an IEP. So it would be my understanding. Certainly, when our family went through early intervention, it was pretty clear that it was from ASDB. So I think that's the case. But Dr. Benedict, do you disagree, or do you have a difference of opinion on that?
I just want to make sure I understood the question. I apologize, PV. Can you repeat that for me? Was it PV?
Sure, I can ask the question again. Do parents actually know that the early intervention is being provided by ASDB. Is that clear, or is that just a thought from what Lynn was talking about as far as IEP meetings and parents not realizing that ASDB are the ones that are providing the school district that service? I know early intervention in itself is its own program, but I'm just wondering, are parents aware?
Very good question. Yes, I would say far more than they are at the school. It's much more clear that yes, while we are part of a team-based early intervention model in birth to 3, they know that there are services that they get from contractors that might send in speech, OT, PT. Some get services from DDD, and then some get services from ASDB. So I think they're pretty aware that we are ASDB teachers going into their home. But like, I understand what Lynn was saying. It's somewhat of a seamless operation when a K-12 itinerant teacher from ASDB goes into a district. It's, you know, we're truly partnering with them. And while we partner as early interventionists, it's much more apparent where the service is coming from. And you probably know too, the IFSP, the Individual Family Service Plan that supports birth to 3, is very different from the IEP plan that supports preschool through 12. So when you were talking earlier about looking at those goals and what the goals are like, they're written very differently on birth to 3. And a lot of the goals are geared toward the family. It's family centered, not child centered. So you might not see specific language goals like we'll gain 100 words by X date. It's much more family centered and talks about what the family's needs for supports. So does that help? Does that answer your question, PV?
Yes, it does help. It may require a little bit of backtracking to the previous point of how we brand to the parents and how do we show that ASDB is providing X, Y, and Z in comparison to what is apparent in early intervention program. Why is that different? And can we model that? Can we model from intervention programs to the school districts and make it clear that we are ASDB providing this service throughout the IEP meeting? How are we representing ourselves? Just a thought, and maybe that can help it as a benefit both for the ELP program, early intervention, and for the school districts and how we collect data.
Okay, thank you. Brittany?
Yeah, I can speak really quick, I guess, as a parent that my daughter received services through ASDB starting at like 2 months old. And it was pretty apparent from the very beginning that where her services came from, and her interventionists had IDs. I'm so sorry, guys. Had IDs, and even her IEP paperwork, by the time she got to preschool, it had ASDB on it. She did attend Foundation for Blind. So I was very well informed that ASDB was providing my daughter her vision and her deaf services. And as well as all of our friends kind of in the community, they know where their services come from. So I feel like we do a good job with that. There might be a lot of gaps, which I do understand. But I don't think it's as big of an issue as it might seem to be. So I don't know if that helps, and it's kind of anecdotal because it's my experience, but I feel like we do a pretty good job.
Yeah, my experience, as a parent.
He was saying, I agree.
Oh,
sorry.
That's okay. I was gonna say my experience as a parent was very similar to yours, Brittany. My experience in early intervention was way before I was on the board. But there was some interaction with FBC, who functions as a contractor and still does today with ASDB. And in fact, ASDB during that period went through some changes. But the case management was always with ASDB. And if we had someone, a service provider from a contractor, it was pretty clear who the contractor was. And if it wasn't from them, it was pretty clear they were coming from ASDB. So at least that's my experience. But again, that we're a number of years separated from that now. So, I'll leave it to Dr. Benedict to let us know how things are performed today. But I think my experience is pretty similar to yours, Brittany.
And yeah, I just wanted to put that out there because I think with the early intervention, anecdotal experiences are great. It proves that at least with early intervention, parents are aware of who's providing those services. So my question is, how can we emulate that after they transition into IEP to make sure that those parents later on, for example, if they move, if we get a transplant, if they move or they need ASDB services later on, like in the co-ops, for example, how do we emulate that from ELP, that branding, to parents so that they know that they are receiving services from ASDB, whether it's in the IEP or partnership with a co-op? What works in early intervention that we can emulate? And I'd also be curious to see what the data comparison is for for parent involvement, the response to surveys from those within early intervention versus those that get those K-12 services.
That's a certainly interesting point. I think one of those reasons is in early intervention, 0 to 3, ASDB has, original jurisdiction, so to speak. We're the agency that's in charge of every child in the state. And that's not the case after the child turns 3. Their responsibility for that child goes to their local school district, and then we work with that local school district in many cases, in various aspects in our early learning program to support that child. Although not all. So there are certainly larger school districts that run their own programs. So I think it's in the early intervention, it's more visible because the case manager is going to be from ASDB. But you bring a good point that when the school district's involved, it can blend together, and that was Lynn's point from earlier today. When the child is older and they're in school, who's a district employee and who's someone from ASDB or who's someone from another contractor is. It can be a bit more murky if you're not paying attention to ID badges and things like that or other paperwork. But for now, are there any questions for Ms. Pyatt on number 3, pillar 3?
I do have a question. Oh, excuse me. No, that was the incorrect one. Please go ahead.
Okay. Well, there's no questions on 3. I think 3 is very good. I think this is really much closer to what we were looking for, than our last round. So, thank you for all that work, and that goes for Dr. Rex and Superintendent Reichman as well. This is I think it's going to be really helpful for us. Your work in the last 2 months is going to be really helpful for the agency, going forward and how we measure progress. If there's none other, we'll go to pillar 4. And Ms. Cooper, and Ms. Cooper, if you can give us maybe a 2-minute overview of this objective.
Okay. Good afternoon, Board President Nigro and members of the board. Last but not least, starting on page 39 begins pillar 4, effective resources management. Pillar 4 has 4 priorities. The first being optimize human resources, where we would address the people and the time. One of our first measures, we would want to chart how many positions we have and how many we have filled, the percentage of those that are highly qualified. Another chart we have in this area is tracking the hiring activities and the success rate. We also have another chart where we thought about showing our staffing ratios. The second priority, where it is aligning capital resources, What we have been working on is developing a long-range facilities plan. We also want to begin thoroughly tracking the management of our agency fleet. And then the third priorities are technology improvements and integration, where we are addressing the allocation of our technology resources, where we're going to start tracking the technology training needs and surveying the training satisfaction with those. The fourth priority seems to be the biggest. If you recall, that is the new priority that was added, and that's maximizing financial resources. For this area, we would be identifying several outcome measures, which most of them are already being tracked and discussed during the finance committee meetings. One of them being identifying the number of students enrolled in the day and residential programs. Another would be identifying the number of students enrolled by disability type. Another metric would show the spending percentage by operational area, where we would show the classroom and non-classroom spend. And then another one would be showing the average cost per student by the various programs we have within the agency. And then also showing for those same programs, the staffing and caseloads. And then another measure would be showing our continuous fiscal stability as well as efficiency. So this pillar is unique in that it covers and supports all of the key areas for the implementation of our agency strategic plan, so that we can make sure that it is successful and we're optimizing the use of our resources. So optimizing people, time, technology, space, financial, and other resources effectively and efficiently actually enhances the learning and supports our improvement goals. So we do believe adequately, as well as aligning and making sure that our resources are equitable, are necessary to improve our agency continuously. So at this time, I'll open it up for any feedback or questions each of you may have.
I do have one question. I think it might be important for us to consider or maybe discuss. Part of the strategic plan is not just public-wide recruitment, but also discussing paths or partnerships, something with those that are already, or those established programs for deaf education specifically. Creating opportunities for those students to come and student teach and expose them to deaf education, itinerant services, the brick and mortar services, and if they are inclined or like those experiences, they might be more inclined to stay. So how do we facilitate long-term plans and goals of incorporating student teachers long-term to become permanent staff employees within our community?
Thank you, Phoebe. I'll take note of that and we'll discuss with the team. Thank you. That's a good point.
Phoebe, that's a great point that you're raising. The pipeline issue is something that, you know, in this space, we're always looking at. Foundation for Blind Children recently partnered with ASU to start what we believe is the only Teach of the Visually Impaired program in Mississippi. That's at ASU now, and those teachers are doing their student teaching or getting their education at FBC, working with FBC classrooms. And that's been pretty effective, thus far. That's a relatively new program, but it's been pretty effective. And I'm wondering if there's something similar that could be done here to support some of these, strategic objectives to shore up that pipeline within our state, so that we're getting, young adults interested in the space to teach. In the special ed space, but in particular, children that are blind or visually impaired, or children that are deaf or hard of hearing. I think we need to be doing that to develop our pipeline so that we have that for the future of the agency.
I think that's great what's happening with ASU and their TVI program. I know that it's relatively new, but it's amazing because we do have a community and we can encourage people to consider that. But a lot of students who graduate from the program or graduate from deaf education, a program of deaf education, in both areas, there are high needs and high demands. We as ASDB need to do something to stand out, to highlight ourselves, to say, hey, we're here. Just simply saying we're here, or this is our pay, this is our benefits package, those will be the same. Those companies and other schools and districts are doing the same thing. So we have to do something a little bit more unique. From my professional experience, when I moved here for my internship experience, I liked what I saw. I liked my experience, which made me stay and become stuck here. So for that process to create a path as a strategic goal of having an actual, like you said, President Nigro, that pipeline is crucial for the goal of the agency. That'll help us to identify those programs and universities out there that do provide programs for TVI or HI and DI, who we can reach out to have student teaching here, have their experiences here. And if they like what they see, they like their experience, they're more inclined to stay. So that does give us a competitive edge. And Linda here. I'd like to add to PV's comment. I feel like that is crucial when we're talking about education. We got to make sure that we have clear pathways. We have one for deaf education and one for TVI. Oftentimes that is kind of blended together in special education, meaning those with disabilities in general. And they include deaf and hard of hearing children within that. So that kind of supersedes the importance of deaf education itself. We want to be explicit in promoting ASDB as deaf education. I know that special education certificates are important, but those students within the classroom, it's often focused on those with additional disabilities. And so they don't understand that there's two pathways to teaching. If we look at ASU, they had a program called Teachers College, and they had a special education program. I did come in to ask if they have a track specialized for deaf education. And if there is, or if that's a need, they can come here and do internships here. So how is that different from, you know, the pros and cons, the gains for both? We'll have to find a university that has a special education track and then partner with them to focus on that deaf education. I mean, that's just an idea, so that we can do more community partnerships within the residential programs to really booster, and it provides those gains and benefits for both. But I think it's worth it to make that attempt, to make those connections. That's just my thoughts.
Thank you, Linda.
I'm not sure if that's actually appropriate for Pillar 4, but again, just a thought I wanted to put out there.
Thank you, Linda. I don't want to interrupt, but we are 90 minutes in, so I do want to take a break for the interpreters. I know we're getting towards the end of the agenda, but I do want to get a break for the interpreters because we're just past the 90-minute mark. So if we could take a 10-minute break, we come back at 5:43, and then we can proceed and continue where we are. Thank you. Okay, I think it's going to be time to come back. There we are, everyone. Thank you for the break. So we were discussing, we're still in item number 4 on the agenda. We're discussing Pillar 4. Ms. Cooper is going to be answering any questions that board members may have. Lynn, I see your camera is open.
Yeah, I don't know if this is under the finance, but I just want to go back to what PV and Linda were talking about as far as teacher training for deaf education. We currently have a program out of the U of A. The problem is not many people are going into the program, and deaf education is not like a strand of special ed. It's always been at least a 2-year program that is just concentrated specifically on deaf education. It's not like a special education program where you may concentrate on autism or one of the other disabilities, such as learning disabilities. It is a concentrated program that is being offered at not a lot of schools. So that's why it's so difficult to find teachers. The programs aren't out there. And we try to get what we can out of U of A, but Tucson kind of grabs them before we can get them. But I just wanted to make that a little more clear as far as what a deaf education program looks like, and really the difficulty of finding people who are in the programs.
Thank you for that, Lynn. Anita, were you going to comment?
Thank you, Shana. Yes, I just wanted to comment that there are activities that we are doing with schools that do have the programs. And so maybe something that we could do is put a chart together of those activities along with the number of internships and practicums that we have each year.
Mrs. PV, that's exactly what I wanted to mention. Thank you, Anita. You stole the thunder. I was also going to maybe recommend adding how many of those universities and institutions do we contact that have special ed programs, if there are any deaf specialties, VI specialties. And if there are, then we definitely need to start developing some sort of MOU, memorandum of understanding, or collaboration or contracts with them. That way we can get them early on in their careers for student teaching and giving them opportunities. So we want to train them in-house and to recruit them and to maintain them. So it's a consideration when we are developing our new hiring process. Maybe we can have some financial support included for asking people from out of state to just come out and move to Arizona, and how can they afford their rent, their food, transportation, what it is to survive as a college student in your practicum or internship. I think having a pay incentive and a contract with that university could be a benefit. So that kind of resource, I think ASDB can look into, either whether it's at PDSD or ASDB Tucson campus. I think we can do a further collaboration for exposing our students and our teachers, but the itinerant services as well. We have the resources. Let's just utilize those resources to develop future teachers, to convince them to want to stay and become actual staff members for the agency, and to grow your own culture.
Thank you.
I agree with you. Yeah, thank you. I agree with you. We can provide a listing of the schools around the United States that we are in contact with and that have programs. I think that would be helpful as well.
Okay, are there any questions for Ms. Cooper about Pillar 4, the objectives under Pillar 4? No, I'm hearing none. I mean, I think these are excellent. They're really outstanding. So thank you so much, Ms. Cooper. This is really helpful for us.
Thank you.
Excellent. So we can move on now to step 5, the next steps for discussion. In terms of where we are in this process, I think last meeting, we gave really substantial input to the staff about what we thought the objectives should be. They've responded in the last 2 months by putting something together that was much more in keeping with our direction. I think that the comments we've heard today have been all useful, and I think there'll be some adjustments to the document. But it seems to me that we're not far off, from being complete. So from my perspective, I really want to get this done and approved by the end of the fiscal year. So that's June 30th. We have a meeting in May. I'd like to be able to get that on the agenda, for next time. And I think that the next, the next step is to have the staff make some of these adjustments and then have it go to us for approval. There will be an opportunity for some public input, both in the public comment at the meeting and through other channels. So we are going to get some of that input as well. But in terms of it being finalized, to me it seems like we're very close to a finished product. Are there board members that don't agree or that have other questions?
I think one thing I'd like to put out there for President Nigro, is there any plan or any timeline per se on how this will be distributed to the public? That way we get feedback from both the deaf, hard of hearing, blind and visually impaired community members. Is this document complete to the point where we are allowed to receive feedback? And obviously with remote learning, I'm assuming internet options, we want to make sure that the community has plenty of time and opportunity and options in how they can review and give input. I think that will give us more time. That will require more time. So I think putting it on the agenda just for public comments and not receiving any may be too hasty. So we would want to set up a plan where we can elicit more involvement from our community and our stakeholders at the same time.
Thank you, PB. We do have a plan to do that, to put it on the website. And I think Nancy Alexander's on the call as well. She may be able to provide more input. But in our planning, we were planning on putting it on the website to have public input in a more formalized way, where you can go to the website and say what you'll need to say, and that would get distributed to the board, for our comments or for our thoughts. In terms of the document itself, the draft document is on board docs, so everyone has this already. But in terms of the next iteration or the adjusted iteration of it, will be up on the main website or one of the subpages of the ASDB website. And again, maybe Nancy, if you're on, I think there were a couple of other ways that we discussed getting this out there. In our last meeting, there were a couple of other groups, I think, that would be circulated.
Yes, we talked about sending out on Parent Square, as well as with all staff members, the availability of the document on the website, and have designed one quick questionnaire. What do you see as the strengths of the strategic plan? What areas would you like us to look as opportunities? What do you aspire as strategic plan? And what really are going to be other measurements for results? So it's called an SOAR. It would then also be distributed during advisory committee meetings. We have a group with ELP, a group with itinerant services, and a parent group that work works with Superintendent Reichel. So those were the plans right now to get public input, any ideas that they might have specifically to the strategic plan.
That sounds
Yes,
great.
Doctor.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And I feel like it will be, some kind of, I'm sure there'll be a social media announcement or an email blast reminding everyone to please review this, and that we are in final draft times for reviews. So please give us your final input and feedback. That way people feel that the urgency is here and they need to say what they need to say.
Yeah. Yes, Vivian, that was really our thinking, as we want it up on the website for the general public, but we want to have that specific feedback, from parents and from educators, from staff and the other educators that we work with. Linda, you had some comments?
Yes, thank you, President Nigro. I hear what you're saying, and when we're looking at the deaf community, as you mentioned, we are planning on hitting the public in different ways. If we're looking at putting this in our board meeting in May for final approval, is that your anticipated final acceptance date? Let me backtrack. So, Annette, when would you start using the strategic plan? What are you visualizing timeline-wise when you will start utilizing this? Annette here, I think we will start July 1st, 2021. It will be a full year that we'll be adopting this for the next school year. And in the spring, we will be able to report out to the board the following fall. So this will be an annual board reporting process. Also, we will be following each board meeting agenda item. So we will be reporting to you what is consistently happening here. We won't have any data specific because most of the measurements are measured annually, but you will be aware of what is happening. So when you look at the data, it will be interpreted at the board meetings with what it means. So that starts July 1st, Linda's asking. So if we approve this in our May board meeting, do we have a subsequent meeting? I don't have our calendar in front of me. So May, our board meeting there, we approve that. When is our next board meeting after that? Would that be July 1st?
We have our next regular board meeting is May 6th, and then after that it's July 22nd.
Okay, so we have about a month from now, per se, to collect that information. Okay, so as a board, we want to make sure that we finalize this document for that, and we're expecting full-on approval to start July 1st in May, correct?
Yes.
I would like to do that.
Enough time to gather information and feedback from our constituents, and again, including the deaf community, is 1 month enough time?
I think that it is, and I think we can work to get there. If we don't, for some reason, we can consider a special meeting in June. Just to handle this.
Great.
I'd prefer not to do that because we already have some other work study sessions planned in the second part of the year. We have our other, in addition to our regular board meetings. So, we can see, where we get on that. But I think 1 month will be enough to get us there. But if you feel differently, or if we get to the May 6th meeting and there's a feeling that we need more work, I mean, we could potentially schedule, a brief special meeting in June, but I'd really like to have it done, by the June 30th.
Thank you, Linda. This is PV. I completely understand what you're saying, President Nigro. I agree, and I also caution us and for us to be aware that those stakeholders do have an opportunity to review and consider and chew on the process, to process the information and really understand we're looking for meaningful impact. So to put people in a hurry, we might not get valuable input. So I don't feel like they might felt heard. May 6th is a good is a timeline that we can ask for responses from the community, but to be open-minded to the possibility that we might need to do an extended special meeting if needed. I appreciate that. And I think the goal is, of course, the strategic plan. Annette, you have our full support, and you want the community to give you full support. So we don't want any doubt or apprehension or any feeling of uneasiness. We want to move forward with complete trust in this document and our plan, because this is our guiding principle for the next 5 years, is to really put forth all our efforts into this process.
Okay, and that's good feedback. Annette, I'm wondering if we can try to kind of fast track some of the adjustments that are going to be made in response to today, and you know, I think there are going to be some, but it's not going to be nearly as extensive as it was from February till now. But if we can get that document adjusted soon in the next week or so, you know, I think we'll be able to get it out there and get some feedback. Does that work for you, Annette? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Great.
Yes.
But
we have already taken down and documented that feedback, and we'll make those adjustments.
Okay.
And I think we should be able to get back to you within 2 weeks.
Okay, great. Yeah, again, I'm open to a special meeting if the board is, and we agree to it, and we'd have to enact it or you know, vote on it in May. If we can get there on May 6th, though, that's, you know, what I prefer. And you're right, this is going to be a living document. You know, our meetings going forward are going to be mapped to, you know, which of these areas are we looking at, and we're going to be looking at this data on a regular basis. I'd like to work with you know, IT to get some kind of dashboarding, so to speak, so that we can have an access to this data. And again, not it's reported, and much of it is annual, but some of it isn't. But I'd like us to be able to constantly be looking at these, so that we're really being able to use the data that we're gathering, you know, from our community and from our students and from our staff to drive agency decisions, so that we're always aware of it at every board meeting, and we're always aware of it to base all of our decisions on at a regular board meeting. And as you know, they can be quite lengthy. Okay, so that sounds like a good plan for going forward. Are there any other questions about that for 5 or the next steps? If not, we can go to number 6, adjournment. And I see Lynn opening her camera. Is there?
It's my job.
It's your job.
What's your job? It's always your job, Lynn. It's always your job. We're the first adjournment.
I moved.
And I second it. I second it.
Second it. All right. All in favor?
That's my job.
Say aye. You can turn on your camera, and you can say yes, or you can indicate it visually, either way, or preferably both. Yes. All opposed? No. Great. Great. So we'll adjourn. Thank you, everyone. I know this process has been a months-long kind of journey. I think we're pretty close to the end point here, and I'm you know, happy that we're able to you know, implement some of these. You know, it's really a different way of looking at how we measure the agency's performance, and how we're going to do that in the years to come, and you know, get some better outcomes, improve our outcomes for our staff, for our students, and also be good stewards of the public funds. So all of that, I think, is part of this document. And thank you so much to the staff for working on it and developing it. And thank you to the media for producing the meeting, and the interpreters, of course, as always. Again, thank you very much. We will see everyone on May 6th.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.